Hello guys, how are you all? Welcome back to my channel. So, today we are gonna see, what if Izuku got harem with 6 girls, part 1. So before we start, please subscribe to our channel and like this video, so let's begin the story. Stop it, Kaken. You're hurting him. A young 4-year-old boy with green hair and eyes named Midoriya shouted, tears in his eyes, as he began to lift his fists up, his body shaking like hell. The blonde before him, a bully named Kitsuki Bakugo with red eyes, looked confused for a moment before smirking and punching his hands together, creating an explosion that made the wince. Don't tell me you're gonna play hero. You don't stand a chance without a quirk, Deku. The 2 other boys beside him also grinned cruelly as they began to activate their own quirks, and Midoriya looked back for a moment, knowing he couldn't run while the kid was still there. So he stood his ground as his body filled with fear and phantom pains already. It was clear he was in no way a fighter, and so he knew he was only going to be beaten to a pulp. He closed his eyes and waited. His beating never came, however, as suddenly a pink blur appeared in front of him, causing all the boys' eyes to widen in confusion as a little girl with curly hair and bubblegum-colored skin glared at the bully. Hey, why don't you jerks just leave them alone? Ha, you really need some stupid girl to defend you, Deku. One of the cronies leered before suddenly another girl's voice spoke up. Defend him? More like putting a bunch of wannabe villains in their place. A girl with a fire in her brown eyes, brunette hair and pink pads on her fingers said as she glared at the bullies. Stopping the only decent person of you from getting hurt is just a bonus. Okay, so 2 girls. The other crony said as he looked around, seeming to get slightly nervous. Dang it, you 2. Yet another girl, this one's much luckier than the others with raven hair and onyx eyes said as she hopped over the fence, followed by 3 more girls. Well, presumably the invisible one was a girl, judging by her blue sundress. There was also a girl with hair a darker shade of green than Midoriya's own that reached down quite far, who had equally darker eyes and a wide mouth, and beside her was the last girl. Make that 6. Said the last girl with a frown, who had bored-looking black eyes and vibrant but short purple hair. Her earlobes continued much longer than a normal human's, turning into wires similar to headphones, with the kind of jacks one would expect to find on such devices. Who the fuck? Kaken pondered, growling, which was only met with an equal growl from the pink-skinned girl, who threw her hand out, and a glob of liquid flew out, hitting the ground and starting to melt it in part. The 2 cronies' eyes widened massively. Leave him alone, she said simply, and the 2 boys at the back seemed to have decided they suddenly didn't want any part in this if they could be hit with that, turning and bolting, leaving the blonde who didn't know how to give up to fend for himself. This was the first time Midoriya ever met his best friends, and with how sudden and surprising their arrival was, with their desire to protect him, one could hardly blame him for thinking they were angels coming to his aid. Bakugo hadn't backed down. He growled and rushed for the pink-skinned girl, or rather, he tried to completely bypass her. Deku? What the fuck is this? He was suddenly smacked out of the air by an incredibly long tongue, and so it began. The first time Tsuyu, Kyoka, Achako, Momo, Toru and Mina had saved him. Mina Shido had always been something of a social butterfly, always flitting from one person to the next, happily including whoever she could, and talking to them all. Still, just because she was friends with a lot of people, even briefly, didn't mean she really connected with every single one. There were always those select few people she just gelled with in a way that left her scrambling to do everything she could to stay in touch. Not easy for a 4-year-old, but she tried nevertheless. Unfortunately for the girl, it rarely worked out that she'd ever connect with people who she was in constant contact with, so it could be easy to lose these special people. Fortunately for her though, there were 5 girls who she managed to stay in contact with fairly often, partially and thanks to one of them, a girl by the name of Momoyoi Rozu, being much more well off than the rest of them. Her best friends. She'd met the rich girl along with another of her friends, Asui, at around the same time. The pink-skinned girl had always been something of an explorer and tended to get herself into silly misadventures, usually involving her getting caked in mud. After the 3rd time she nearly drowned herself in a lake, her parents had driven down to the local swimming center and signed the girl up for their swimming classes they held for children. She'd been super excited when she'd gone down that day, bouncing in the car the whole time as she pretended to swim through her blanket that her mother always threw over her to accommodate for the lack of heating. When they'd finally gotten in, they'd met their strict but kind swimming instructor, who had eventually instructed them to form groups of 3 each. They'd all complied as the pink-skinned girl tugged at her blue and yellow polka dot swimsuit, hurrying over to the only other 2 girls in the place. They'd quickly shaken hands, introducing each other. Heya. I'm Mina Shido, it's nice to meet ya. Mina had been a little intimidated, but still found it cool how Momo towered over the others even at such a young age, clearly wearing some kind of black swimsuit meant for 7 years old at a guess. Oh, hello, my name is Momoyoi Rozu. It's nice to meet you too. The other girl who had introduced herself with a croak had been Tsuyu Asui, wearing some kind of striped sailor-like uniform as she talked to them. She also had an adorable lisp. "My name with Ribbit. It's nice to meet you both well." It had taken the pink girl a moment to translate the lisp mentally, but as soon as she did, she clapped her hands together happily and had been happy to make new friends. She'd been curious as to why they had been in the class, even though there weren't many answers one could give, but she still got some surprisingly unique ones. Asui wasn't here so much for learning how to swim, as she was learning to swim properly, as her quirk gave her the abilities of a frog. This meant she was already good at swimming, but she had a few bad habits her parents wanted her to break to be better, especially as the little girl expressed a desire for heroics, which had quickly captured the other two's attention. As it turned out, all three of them had an interest in heroics, as Shido found out when she interrogated the tallest of the three next. As well as looking unique, it turned out the girl was actually from a super rich and famous family, which Mina thought sounded so cool. Apparently because Momo wanted to try her hands at something more down to earth than running a business though, her parents had decided that she would of course need a lot of training, and they had decided to take her to a few public learning centers so she could get used to interacting with more normal people. It had been a small connection, but they had found themselves quickly conversing over it until they had been called on by their new instructor. Later, they had all had to leave, but the next time they had come here, they had gone back into the same group and this time even ended up getting Momo's phone number, the only one who had a personal phone. Mina had called her later that day from her house phone and they had ended up convincing their parents to set up a play date of sorts. Momo had even managed to get a hold of Asui and invite her along as well, which Mina had been more than happy about. She wasn't ever sure how to describe it really, this connection, but as soon as it formed, she just knew it was there. It never let her down, so she always did whatever she could to hold on to it when it showed up, and she was glad she'd managed to find a way to stay in touch with the two girls. Because the connection was there. Mina and Momo walked along the pavement, holding hands so as to not lose each other, while they hurried along to the concert. It was rare kids could ever get into a place like this, but Momo's parents had pulled a few strings because of their daughter's love of the band and gotten the girl two child's tickets. This meant she'd had to choose between Asui and Ishido. She didn't have many close friends, which had been tearing at her, but ended up being a non-issue when it turned out Asui would be out of the country for a week on holiday with her parents. So now the two little girls were right near the back, sitting on top of the support after being lifted up by one Mr. Yaoirazu to watch, as a woman stepped out with long purple hair onto the stage, twirling her elongated earlobe around her finger. It was similar to a headphone jack, and the girl's attention was captured immediately. "Alright everyone, before we get onto the main event, we have a cover of a song to get us all in the mood. Are you ready to hear it?" The crowd cheered, Mina included, while her taller friend just smiled happily. Music began to play, filling the room as she pulled the microphone off its stand. "Then let's get into it. This song is called Special by an old band called Shinedown." She began to sing, a lovely angelic voice that fitted the song perfectly coming from her, and the two girls swayed in time to the music, leaning against one another for support. Suddenly, a grunting noise caught their attention, and their gazes shifted over to see a girl with a heavy resemblance quietly leaning against the wall near them. "Oh, hi," Mina said, trying to shout over the overpowering music to the girl. She looked up and just nodded a greeting before wincing. Is something the matter?" "Oh, are you related to the singer?" She again nodded, before wincing once. Again. Mina looked back to her friend concerned, who tilted her head in thought before suddenly her eye lit up. Her arm glowed, and she reached over, tapping the girl. Mina only saw them for a moment, but it was long enough for her to know that what the raven-haired girl had made was a pair of earplugs which the other girl quickly stuffed in. "Thanks. I love my mom, but these concerts always hurt my ears," she explained, and Mina frowned. "That sucks. I'm Mina, and this is Momo. It's nice to meet you." Kaiokajiru. They had lapsed into a silence after that for a while, until the other two girls needed to take breaks themselves from the loud noises and bright lights. They'd stepped outside, and the purple-haired girl had nervously followed them. She'd seemed ready to run once their eyes had landed on her, but Mina had quickly waved her over happily, and they'd begun to talk. Apparently every now and again, the girl would have to travel around to concerts with her parents, but their combined quirks greatly focused the intensity of the noise. She never told them because she didn't want to hurt their feelings thinking their music was hurting her, but it really wasn't fun for the girl. She made a comment about not really having any friends to hang out with during these times, so she had no choice but to go with, and instantly Mina had met Yaoirazu's eyes, sharing a nod. "We'll be your friends." It had been impulsive really, but Mina didn't care. Because she could feel that little niggling sensation again. The one that separated her friends from her besties. Jiro was one of those people she knew she could connect with if she just tried, and so tired she would. After Asui had gotten back from holiday, the other two girls had set up another meet-up where the frog girl and rocker girl had met, and Ashido was excited to see she herself was finally getting proper friends. She didn't have to worry about disappearing. And because my tongue is still growing, that's why I speak funny. Ribbit. Asui explained to the pink-skinned girl as the two walked around the model solar system and the space museum the frog girl's parents were taking them to visit. They'd known each other for 2 months now, and Ashido would argue she'd become something of a pro at understanding the frog girl. A part of her was almost sad to learn it would be disappearing though. It was an adorable and quintessential part of her, and it was hard to imagine her without it. It had been dirt cheap, so there had really been no reason not to go for them as a fun day out. The frog girl's parents were perhaps the second most relaxed of their families, beaten out only by Jiru's parents, mainly because they literally couldn't focus on it half the time, being swamped by a mob of people trying to get autographs, no matter how many times they were told no, not right now. Oh, and mom says if I really focus, one day it might be able to outshine the sun with my quirk. They overheard a feminine voice say excitedly, drawing their attention to a pair of girls who seemed to be having fun. The one who was talking seemed to be completely invisible, only her clothes even indicating she was there. She was talking to a girl with short brown hair who was listening intently, as if her life depended on it, nodding along to the girl's explanations with a beaming smile. That's so cool, Hagakure. That's better than my floating quirk. No. Your quirk is so much cooler and much more fitting for a place like this. The invisible girl deflected, moving in a way so animated it made her movement surprisingly easy to follow as she shook her head. You'll be like some super cool space hero, and I'm just a flashlight no one notices otherwise. Well, we certainly noticed you. Mina interrupted almost instinctively as she hurried over, forcing Asui to catch up. She beamed at them both with a little wave. Sorry, I know it's rude to interrupt, but I overheard you, and I have to say my piece because they both sound like amazing powers. Mina Ashido, by the way. Oh, Toru Hagakure. Ichako Uraraka. It's nice to meet you both. The pink-haired girl giggled, clapping her hands together happily. This is my friend Sue and snap. All their eyes widened suddenly as they looked up to see one of the fake star orbs dangling from the roof began plummeting, heading right for the acid girl. Before she knew what was happening, Hagakure dived forward and pulled her out the way, and Uraraka jumped, floating the object just in time to stop it breaking and hurting anyone before letting it go. Oh my god, Asui, Mina. A woman called, running over to check on them. Mina, being the maiden of misadventure that she was, just started to laugh while Asui fretted over her ride alongside her mother. See? She said, pointing at Uraraka with a grin before then looking at the invisible girl still stopping her. And you didn't even need to use your power. You're both awesome already. Mina, maybe we should go home now. Plate doesn't theme that anymore. Rivet. Sayu said with a worried gaze, her mother nodding in agreement. Okay, she nodded, knowing there was no way to argue otherwise. Still, she didn't feel like she'd done quite enough yet for the two girls she just met, so she did the first thing she could think of. Momo later got on her case for giving out her number without asking, but it had seemed half-hearted. In fact, if anything, she sounded more giddy than annoyed at the prospect of more friends. For the next few months, they'd all meet up every now and again in random mixes of groups, just trying to see who could see who. Mina and Momo usually accompanied the others almost all the time. And eventually, the day came. One none of them expected, and one none of them would ever change for anything in the future. Hag, you're it. Ashido, wearing a black t-shirt and jeans, laughed as she tapped Uraraka, who had a simple gray NASA hoodie that reached past her knees, on the back before bolting, as fast as she could from the girl, heading near the edges of Musatafu's General Park. For the first time in a while, the whole group had managed to get together, as Momo's parents had decided to throw a party for their daughter getting into a well-respected private elementary school. Initially the raven-haired girl, who currently donned a red dress, hadn't wanted a party at all, and really she wasn't thinking of it as one, but she hadn't stopped it once she'd seen the opportunity to turn it to her advantage. When her parents asked how she wanted the party, she'd made it very clear she didn't want any big extravaganza or formal ball. They would if she asked, she was fully aware. She just wanted to run around a park for a few hours with her friends, having fun. The biggest expense had been getting everyone to Musatafu, the centermost point between them all. Jiru actually lived right on the fringe of the city and the rest of the girls around it, so they decided it was the perfect place for everyone to spend some time together. Come on, Uraraka. Hagakure, wearing a frilly blue sundress complete with a hat, laughed maniacally as she ran circles around the poor brunette. Can't catch me. She always had been the fastest. While her invisibility was certainly useful, when it came to her physical abilities Hagakure was practically quirkless, so she always seemed to think she had a lot to prove. If they could see her, she'd probably be the most jacked little girl one could be. Mina giggled as she watched a floating girl desperately try to catch her, before then turning her attention to Momo, who laughed as she dived under the girl's hand. "You can do it, I believe in you." Asui, wearing a frog-themed shirt and shorts, called while bouncing away. Jiru, who wore torn jeans and a black skull shirt clinging tightly to her back and giggling. The brunette let out a determined huff before turning to Mina and launching at her again. Mina had been planning to dodge as a massive grin took over her face, but very quickly it disappeared as the distant sound of crying reached her ears. She felt Uraraka tag her, but she looked away as a voice reached her ears and she saw a green-haired boy with a blue shirt shaking as he held his fists up. He was quite clearly terrified as he faced down three much crueler-looking boys, and behind him, an injured boy sat crying on the ground. "Stop it, you're hurting him." One of the boys set off an explosion with a cruel grin, and that's when Mina's brain stopped processing everything properly. She just knew those three were bullies, and there was nothing Mina Shido hated more than bullies. "Wait, Mina, don't." Too late, the pink-skinned girl was bolting to the play park they were in, hopping the fence as the greenette's eyes screwed tight, clearly expecting to be beaten. The part of Mina registered that meant he was used to being attacked, which just brought more anger to the surface as she glared at the suddenly very confused boys. They muttered in something of quiet awe as she stared at them down. "Leave them alone, you jerks." At first, they were amused at her inference. That amusement and cockiness had quickly faded faster and faster as her friends rushed to back her up, knowing they couldn't just leave her alone, even if they might get in trouble. Her display of her acid had been the last nail in the coffin that had sent the two followers running for the hills, not wanting any part now they didn't expect to win, leaving only the leader, the blonde bastard, as he'd later be referred to by the girl, to face them alone. He didn't back down like the other two. Whether it was because he was brave or stupid would depend on who you asked. Either way, he'd practically refused to acknowledge the sudden small armada around him as a threat, launching for his target anyways. Mina had lifted her hand to attack, but before she could even get a hit in, Asui's tongue, which had finally started to sort itself out, her lisp becoming much less noticeable, and, as a result, her tongue becoming much stronger, which knocked him off course, and suddenly he let out an explosion from his hand, flying at the girls this time. "Ah, you bitch," he screamed, rocketing towards the pink-skinned girl. "Pakin, no. Fuck you, Deku." The following battle that ensued was hardly the stuff of legend or even held the gravitas of a usual pro-hero outing, but the girls still thought they handled themselves well for an incredibly unexpected fight, all while their opponents screamed abuse and obscenities at them. He'd aimed a strike at Mina, who had her careful acid movements she'd been practicing to dodge it clumsily. He'd shot right past her and been stabbed in the leg by an earphone jack, causing him to let out a howl of pain. He stumbled back before suddenly a strong strike to the back of his neck caused him to collapse, and all eyes turned to the floating sundress that was Hagakure. "Thank you," Midoriya said, eyes wide in awe and shock. What they didn't know at the time was that his thoughts were a tornado of chaos, because these six angels had come out of nowhere and defeated the strongest person he knew, almost seeming to do it without effort. "Thank you so much." A rustling noise grabbed all their attention and they turned to the other crying boy. Izuku's eyes widened and he tentatively reached out, looking almost afraid. Hey, are you okay? The girls had been expecting an answer, whether to yes or no. What none of them had expected was for the boy to take one look at who was asking and slap them to the ground while standing up. "Get away from me, you useless freak." With that, the girl's jaws dropped as she twitched on the floor and the victim ran away. Mina was absolutely disgusted with the boy, but he left him to run as she quickly hurried to the green-haired boy's side as he shivered and whimpered, and she frowned gently, setting her hand on his shoulder. Hey, are you okay?" "I'm fine," he muttered sadly, pushing himself up and holding his cheek as he forced himself into a seating position. "I'm used to That's horrible." Momo frowned, walking over herself and gently taking his hand down. If it weren't for the red mark from the slap helping hide it, she'd be seeing him blushing at the contact. "That will bruise." "Talk about a jerk. You were defending him and he did that?" Uraraka asked, clearly not impressed. Her tone then turned softer as she tilted her head. "Who are you anyways?" "Izuku Midoriya," he said with a sad sigh, "but might as well call me Deku. Everyone else does." "Yeah, no. None of them were having that. WHRU?" He pondered, tilting his own head in a manner similar to Uraraka. She always made it look cute, but this boy made it downright adorable, even with a swelling cheek. "I'm Mina Shido. Sayu Asui. Ichako Uraraka. Momoyoi Rozu. Guru Hagakure. Hyoka Jiru. Nice to meet you." He nodded, doing his best to remember his manners. Mina frowned, gently settling a hand on his shoulders. "Why did he attack you? Why would they do that to you?" she asked confused before pointing to the kid they knocked out. "And what's up with Blondie?" "Pakin is complicated." He sighed, looking up to the sky. "He's really strong. His quirk is amazing, but no one really told him what not to do. The teachers are scared of him, and someone useless like me isn't worth listening to. Suddenly, Mina lightly slapped her hands onto his cheeks, staring deep into his green eyes with a fire. Hey. Don't say that, you are not useless. Izuku just looked away. Come on, what's your quirk? I bet it's something amazing. He whimpered. Having someone care, even for a moment, was nice while it lasted, but he couldn't stretch it out forever. I'm quirkless, he said quietly, and the girls all shared shocked and understanding looks at that. He flinched, looking at them, as if expecting to be attacked again, but instead they all just held looks of sympathy. A moment of silence passed between them all, and when they didn't leave, Izuku's gaze turned confused. You aren't leaving. Why would we leave? Do you want me to leave? No. Are you going to hit me? Mina let out a small growl, pointing at the blonde. You. No. Him. Maybe. Do you really think you're useless? Even the teachers say it. Then those teachers are idiots. Hagakure suddenly cut in, sitting in front of him. They don't know anything if they think being quirkless is the same as being useless. She's right. Jiru said lazily, twirling her earphone jack in her fingers. Quirkless people literally built our whole world, right Yumomo? Oh. Yes, they did. Even the park we're in was completely down to quirkless people from centuries ago. The raven-haired girl assured, giving him a bright grin. In fact, as far as I know, the only line of work that wasn't once dominated by quirkless people was. Their spirits fell as the boy shifted and Momo finished quietly as the realization hit her. Hero work. That's what you want to do, isn't it? I know it's never happened before, but there's nothing I want more. He said, and suddenly Mina began to laugh. He flinched, thinking she was finally seeing him for the idiot he was. I know it's not. Oh come on, enough of that. She said patiently. You tried to protect someone who wasn't even grateful from a person you were clearly terrified of. It doesn't get more heroic than that, plus it's just funny cause all of us want to be heroes too. He looked surprised at that, and they all gave him nods with soft patient smiles to try to help him feel better. Some of them seemed like they were thinking of moving on by now, assuming their duty was done, but Mina picked up on the fact that even beyond what they saw, things must be so bad for this kid. So one couldn't blame her for doing the smallest thing she could. Want to play with us? She asked, and the boy looked surprised before looking to the other girls to check if it was okay. Some were a little surprised by it, not really sure how they felt about playing with a boy, but one looked at his hopeful gaze, and they all nodded their own agreement. Can I really? Mina nodded, pulling him up onto his feet as she bounced on the heels of her own, slinging an arm around his neck and meeting the other girl's gaze. We can play heroes, so you can see what it's like to be the hero. Really? I mean Kakin never let me actually be the, well, we're better than him. She said determinedly, ignoring the conflicted look that statement sent through the greenet's eyes. She turned to her friends with a smile. What do you all say? Dibs on sidekick. Jiru blurted out quickly, your Raka falling down a moment later. Same. Then I shall play a villain. Momo decided, grabbing Hagakure. And I've got my hostage. Dang it, every time we play. Oh, I'll join you as a hostage so you aren't alone. Mina said, happy to take the more boring role for her friend's sake. So Izuku, you're the hero. Let's go over to the main park though. Oh, well okay. He said, following them with the first genuinely happy smile he'd had on his face in a long time. He briefly spared a glance to the unconscious Kakin, but he knew the boy would be fine on his own and felt like he'd be safer from his wrath with the girls. Or at least delay it. No. Momo let out a fake fading wail as she pretended to drift unconscious from Izuku's beam attack. They decided to pretend he could shoot invisible beams to give him the feeling of having a quirk to an extent, and he ran over unable to suppress a giggle as he untied the girls playing hostage. I've got you, you're safe now. He declared happily, the girls sharing smiles now that they could see the boy with a much happier grin. Hell, all of them were smiling, something about his attitude and aura was just infectious, and he'd made this whole day go from fun to unforgettable. And Mina could feel that connection again. For the moment however, she focused on standing up and congratulating the boy with Hagakure. The invisible girl then cocked her head to the side however, a habit many of them had picked up from one of the girls. Wait, what do we do to thank a boy hero? She asked, as if uncertain. Mina shrugged, taking a guess. She'd watched plenty of movies, so she just did what she thought was normal, leaning and planting a kiss on the boy's cheek, causing him to blush bright red as he stood stock still. Oh right, that. Mwah. And the invisible girl followed it up with a kiss of her own, making Izuku look like he was going to faint. Once he calmed down however, he found himself laughing alongside the girls over it all as they just talked and relaxed for a couple of minutes. Eventually though, all good things come to an end and this was no exception. Girls, it's time to go. A woman shouted, walking over before looking up and stopping. Oh, hello. I see you all made a friend. Mom. This is Midoriya. Nice to meet you miss. Midoriya said with a polite bow, and the woman smiled. Nice to meet you too. Well, at least he has good manners anyways. Your parents will be wondering where you are by now, so it's time to take you all home. Okay. Was the main thing that came from most to their mouths, though Mina quickly whirled on the spot and met Izuku's eyes. This play session had initially just been meant as a kind of one-time thing, but now she'd be damned if she lost him. Because the connection was one of the strongest she'd ever had. Do you have a phone number, Midoriya? We can all stay in touch if you do. Oh. Yeah, hang on just a moment. He'd said, before pulling a phone out of his pocket and showing them. My mom wants to be sure I always have a way of reaching her. He quickly gave the girls his numbers, and what none of them realized was at that moment, it had begun. The bond that would never be broken no matter who tested it in the years to come. From the second they had all climbed into the Yaoi Raozu's limousine and left Musatafu's General Park to bring Jiro to her house, Izuku was stuck in Mina's head. The girls all talked happily with one another, and initially she was totally into the conversation as they discussed the boy and explained to the creation girl's mother why they were playing with him, but eventually their conversation shifted to when they might be able to meet up again, and the pink-skinned girl's response at that point rarely had more than one word. It wasn't that she wasn't interested, but the green-haired boy was in every corner of her mind at that moment because of a key detail that hadn't occurred to her until after they were leaving. That Kaken bully had seemed weirdly determined to be a jerk and to hurt Midoriya, and he didn't seem like the type who would take well to being humiliated. If the two boys didn't run into each other again it might work out, but they clearly knew each other somehow, which left Mina worried that something might happen to the boy. As well as that, he seemed to just not be able to comprehend the idea of someone being nice to him at first, and that didn't sit right with her at all. Vaguely registered the car pulling up to Jiro's place, and she looked up, waving bye to their purple-haired friend. Before she could step out though, Mr. Yaoi Raozu suddenly cleared his throat. He was a lanky man in a gray suit with well-kept hair, as black as his daughter's, and tired but kind eyes. He had a small scar above his lip and two piercing blue eyes. Before I forget girls, me and my wife have been talking with your parents about something important. This quickly caught everyone's attention, and Mina tilted her head in curiosity. Judging by the look on her face, even Momo didn't know what this was about. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a flip phone with a purple case the same shade as the earjack girl's hair, who he gave it to. You are all clearly really close friends, and it's a shame these are the only times you get to hang out. With Momo going to that school now, she might have less chances to hang out with you all personally, and we know you all use her to talk with others. He began explaining kindly, seeing the confused look on the little girl's face. Your parents don't think you're old enough for proper mobile phones yet, which is their call to make, but we did all agree that you should have these flip phones. As he said that, he took more out of his pockets and handed them to each girl aside from his daughter, due to her already having a red one. Mina's was bubblegum pink with a few smiley face stickers plastered on top. Everyone else also seemed to be color-coded to their hair, with Uraraka getting a deep brown flip phone, Asui a green one, and finally Hagakure getting a yellow phone. Of course, they had never seen her hair, but she always claimed it was a brilliant blonde. All of them were stunned, and Uraraka started to sputter and seemed lost on what to say, which simply amused the man. Before any of you say anything, don't worry about the costs. Me and Mrs. Jiro are paying for the contracts for each of you happily, so just enjoy being able to talk. Knowing our kids are happy and safe has no price. Thank you so much. Jiro was the first to recover, absolutely beaming after a moment. It was a rare sight to see such a big smile on her face, and it was a moment they all treasured whenever it came along, due to how blindly bright her true smiles could be. The other girls followed with their own gratitude soon after, and the girl left once Mr. Yaoi Raozu assured he would give the rocker girl's number to the rest of the girls. That's how they spent the rest of the ride up to Hagakure's house, the next nearest person to Musatafu, trading numbers and making sure they worked. Mina couldn't wipe the wide grin off her face as she looked down at her contacts and saw almost all her friends there. Each of them were named and with a number, but there was still plenty of room left. Quietly, while the others talked, she decided to make a sixth contact, Izuku Midoriya. Doing her best to remember his number, she could only hope the one she got was right before she put it away to talk with her other friends all the way home. Mom? I'm back. Izuku called as he hurried into the apartment with a soft smile. There was a cacophony of clattering a moment later before a somewhat plump woman walked out into the living room with a worried smile. He had noticed his mother was getting fatter, for lack of a better term, and he had no idea why. Whenever he asked, she would tell him not to worry about it. Maybe it was just something that happened to adults. Welcome back, Izuku. Did you have a good day? She asked hesitantly, and to her surprise the boy nodded. A more genuine smile came onto her face at that news, and she tilted her head to the side. Oh. What happened? Nothing. Izuku lied, wincing, as he did. He didn't like telling his mother lies, but he knew what would happen if he didn't. He knew people didn't really like him. Kakin had made sure he understood that much a long time ago. He had so much fun today, and he wanted to believe he had no friends, but a nagging part of his brain wouldn't stop telling him they were just being really, really nice. He knew they asked for his number, but it would be easy to forget it after or just never use it. One thing was for sure, he didn't want to get his mother's hopes up because he knew it would hurt her more than him if he told her. Nothing happened, so it was a good day. Inko asked with a slight hint of concern in her voice. Izuku just let out a noise of affirmation before heading for the couch and pulling out a notebook, turning on the TV. He missed the elder Midoriya's frown. Well okay, I guess. Dinner will be ready in about half an hour. Thanks mom. Midoriya said as he turned to the news and kept an eye out for any new hero debuts. This was how he always spent his first hour home, looking for any new pros who he could take notes on. As he watched this time however, somewhere in the back of his mind he couldn't help but picture the girl he met before as a pro. He didn't even realize when he stopped writing actual notes and just started doodling the girls and ideas for costumes. He only stopped when his phone suddenly went off and he saw he had a text from an unknown number. Mina looked at her new phone sitting on her bed with a glare as she mentally considered what she was planning to do. She really wanted to talk with Izuku again already, but a part of her worried a little. What if that scares him off? He seems like he could be easily spooked and I don't want to creep him out, but I really want to talk to him. She shook her head, just grabbing it and quickly going through until she found the boy's contact. She paused for just a moment before compassing her message. You? Hi, it's Mina. From the park. How are you? She waited anxiously for a reply, staring at the screen intently in hopes she'd get a quick response, even though that was unlikely. Just when she was about to give up hope on getting one though, a message came through. Izuku Midoriya. Ashido. Are you texting me? You? Ashido, yeah. Of course, why wouldn't I? Izuku Midoriya. I thought you only asked for my number to be nice. You? No. You were so cool. Why wouldn't I want to talk with you? Izuku Midoriya. You mean that? You? Yeah. I really want to meet you again. I want to be friends. Izuku Midoriya. Me too. You? I got a phone, so want to tack. Izuku. Yes, please. Mina's grin grew wide and happy as they began to just talk. Nothing in particular, just interests and what she and the girls did. She was interested when he mentioned he was taking notes on heroes and got to see just a few of them. Before either of them even knew it, night was falling as they talked about meeting again someday and Mina's consciousness began to slip, a dopey smile on her face. In Izuku's house, he found himself in a similar predicament on the couch, lying down and starting to lose his grasp on the waking world, the happiest smile he'd had in a long time adorned on his face. He'd been the first to say goodnight, knowing he was close to passing out. So close in fact that he practically fell into the realm of dreams at the same time he pressed send, dropping his phone onto the floor in the process. The sound attracted the attention of his mother, who had hurried through and picked it up. The plump woman had only intended to put it somewhere safe, but upon seeing he was texting someone she had paused. She'd never known him to text anyone but her and of course curiosity got the better of her as she sat down, going through the messages and deciphering them the best she could. That was why had anyone been walking by their apartment at that moment, they would have heard a sharp and happy cry. My baby has friends. Izuku hates school. He hated the crowds, the teachers who ignored you when something happened to you, but rushed around for everyone else, the students who would abuse that fact. And of course, there was Kakin. Izuku always dreaded returning to school, but now he was practically on the verge of having an anxiety attack over it as he stared up at the intimidating building. Somewhere within, he'd eventually find a blonde who would be none too happy to see him, and he already knew what would be coming. With shallow breaths, he still began to make his way inside. As much as he hated it, he knew there was no way around. Boom. Way more suddenly than they could have expected, an explosion went off in his face, and there was a sudden painful impact on his stomach, bringing him to his knees. He was thrown to the floor a moment later, and he felt a foot come down on his head and bring tears to his eyes. Do you think I would have let you get away with that fucking stunt, Deku? The foot landed on his nose, and he felt a crack. You're nothing, you fucking bastard. Kitsuki screamed before setting off more explosions on the boy and burning him in the process. "Ah, catch an st stop." Midoriya cried out in pain and fear, but for his efforts, he only got a kick in the ribs, causing him to let out a pained cry. "It hurts. It's what you fucking deserve, you pathetic shit. Need some stupid girls to defend you, Deku. If those fuckers hadn't come out of nowhere, I'd make sure they knew just how fucking stupid it is to side with you." Another kick and a sad and worried thought barely registered in the child's brain. Maybe I shouldn't meet them, so Kakin doesn't. He couldn't even finish the thought before a fist to the head finally broke his grip on consciousness. Midoriya groaned as his eyes blinked open and he looked around. He frowned as he realized where he was pretty quickly, feeling his body ache with pain. His eye in particular felt really weird and overblown. The school infirmary, a place he had to come to all too often, and a place he hated. A shuffling noise brought his attention to the school nurse, whose gaze hardened immediately upon seeing him. "Oh good, you're finally awake. Hopefully your mother will be here soon so you can stop wasting space," she said harshly, making Midoriya flinch. That was one of the two reasons Midoriya hated being here so much. The nurse seemed to think he was nothing more than a waste of air leeching of her work for some reason. The other was simply just that if he ended up here, it meant Katsuki was in a terrible mood. With that thought, he frowned and turned to look for his stuff, knowing he had it on him when he was beaten up. "Stupid brat, starting fights you can't win," the nurse muttered angrily, and Midoriya sighed. Of course that's how Kaken would have framed it. It didn't matter if all evidence pointed to the contrary, it only mattered that they believed the version of events that wouldn't get the blonde in any trouble. Midoriya reached for his bag, seeing it at his bedside. He reached out for it and missed. He tried again, and once again missed before finally getting it the third time. Once he did, he put it on the bed and quickly pulled out his phone, feeling his eye ache. Oh, he opened the camera on the device, flipping it around to his face and letting out a small gasp. He had a black eye and a scar under his nose. His arms were littered with burns near the top and he knew there would be more bruises on his stomach. He sighed, closing the camera and frowning as he idly tapped through the phone. He hadn't actually turned it on until just now, having been in a hurry to get ready for school. He noticed a notification for a text message and opened it up, finding Mina had sent him a message around the same time he had been getting beaten. "Mina. Want to go to the amusement park next week? Momo got tickets." Bakugo's words flashed through his head and he winced as he began to type out a response. He had to say no, right? He couldn't be friends with someone if they were going to get hurt for it, and it's not like they needed him. They were amazing and he was just some Deku, so it made sense to say no. Despite that, however, he couldn't bring himself to say no. "Why oh you, if you want me to be there, then okay." He let out a sigh as the response was sent. He'd just have to do what he could to not let Bakugo know. The following Friday, Izuku was quiet as he weaved his way through the crowd, mother smiling behind him as she helped him to squeeze through and get to the gate. She'd been incredibly excited when he told her and had for some reason even almost ended up crying when they mentioned they were girls. He'd been worried he'd done something wrong, but she'd been quick to assure him they were happy tears. He was wearing a long-sleeved t-shirt and trousers to hide his new marks. He sadly couldn't do anything about the eye. It didn't take them long to find the girls, Mina making the group stand out massively. As soon as the boy got close, they noticed him and Mina bolted at him, throwing her arms around his neck, which he returned awkwardly in surprise. "Midoriya. Hi Shido," he said quietly, admittedly enjoying the warmth of the embrace. A moment later she pulled away and the other girls waved at him, which he returned shyly. "It's nice to see you again. Ribbit," Asui said with a happy croak, and to everyone's surprise for some reason that alone managed to make the blush. "It's nice to see you too," he said, an odd look on his face, as if he was confused about something. He shook his head though, deciding to ignore it. For some reason, she just made him feel good when she talked to him. "Wait, hang on." Uraraka suddenly called, bounding up to him with a frown before gasping. "Why do you have a black eye?" "Huh?" Momo asked, walking over herself before frowning. "Oh dear, that doesn't look good." "It's nothing," he said, waving it away. "Just ran into a door." It was better to tell them that than to tell them Bakugo did it, he thought, for two reasons. The first was that he didn't want them confronting Bakugo over it, even though he found it unlikely they would, because he wanted to keep them away from him, and on top of that he didn't want to make them feel bad. "That doesn't look like a door, did it?" Hagakure muttered suspiciously to herself, but they fortunately seemed to decide to let it go for now. "Well, anyways, we should let you know we have access to every ride, as long as we're the right age," Momo said to them with a soft smile, handing him a ticket. Jiru then spoke up from where she was sitting, twirling her earjacks in her hands. "We said we'd take turns picking rides, and we agreed to let you choose first when you got here," she said, before smiling softly at the greenette's confused face. "Why me?" "Well, because you're the new guy," Mina said, as if it was obvious, before giving him a somewhat more serious look. "Plus, you could use it." He didn't quite understand what she meant by that, but at their expectant looks, he quickly turned to the rides and decided to start small. "Can we go on the teacups? I need to work my way up." "Yay. I love those," Hagakure said happily, suddenly bounding forward and taking the boy's hand and, as well as the nearest girls, which happened to be Mina, trying to pull them along. "Let's go." Hagakure waited. Momo called out to her before sighing and smiling with amusement and exasperation when the invisible girl didn't listen. The group quickly made their way after the kids, while Linko approached the people looking after the girls to talk. Soon enough, they were all sat on a single teacup, Izuku sandwiched in between Jiru and Hagakure, with all of them giggling as it began to pick up speed. Mina giggled happily, and the young boy among them looked on with all their happy faces, before smiling to himself. He was really glad he didn't say no, because something about getting to see these girls so happy just felt right. He felt a slight pressure on his side as they began to turn the corner, and suddenly he had Jiru's head on his shoulder, though not by her choice. Still, he couldn't say he was against it. Having fun, Midoriya? Ribbit? Asui asked, tilting her head as she did, and he looked up to answer her. As soon as his eyes landed on her, the words died in his throat, however, as his stomach felt weird. Like there were butterflies flying about inside him. Huh? Was she this pretty last time? Midoriya? Sorry, yeah, I am. He said happily, face once again more red, much to the other girl's concern. Are you sure you're alright? You're flush? Momo asked, concerned, and he nodded. Not used to amusement parks fully. He said, because that's what it must have been, right? He was just adjusting to this kind of place. Well, okay. The raven-haired girl decided to accept that as the ride began to slow down and they all clambered off, most of the girls giggling happily as they came down. Oh, let me pick the next one, please. Uraraka asked hopefully, and after a moment of waiting the others let her go ahead, so she pointed to a nearby area filled up with trampolines. Those are awesome. It's like being weightless, but not throwing up. The other girls giggled and Izuku just looked confused. Was that an in-joke he didn't get? Why would being weightless make someone throw up? Alright, let's go. Mina said excitedly, beginning to walk when a sudden loud rattling noise got all their attention, a roller coaster near to them speeding past with people screaming. Midoriya suddenly shouted himself at the sudden noise, arms instinctively coming up to his head and causing the girls to all look at him concerned. Midori? Hagakure asked with a worried tone, and he looked up with heartbreaking frightened eyes. Before anyone else could say anything to the sight, the creation girl among them walked up to him and frowned softly with a look in her eyes, as if she'd figured out a puzzle. You're scared of the rides? She asked simply, and he looked away as his face turned crimson once more, but this time it was clearly out of embarrassment. He nodded to confirm it. Why? It's stupid, he said, flinching at how pathetic he probably sounded. It's not stupid to be scared of something, especially if you have a good reason. She assured him, putting a gentle hand on his shoulder. Why did it scare you? The loud noises. He admitted in his quietest voice. As soon as he did, however, Mina finally took initiative herself, bounding up to him and pulling him into a right hug. Ah, well then I'll stick with you the whole time, okay? She said with a bright smile. None of it can hurt you cause I won't let it. Me neither. Uraraka said happily, coming up onto his other side. We'll stay by your side while we're walking and everything will be fine, okay? The soft smile came onto the boy's face. It was such a small act, but it did make him feel so much better. Thank you. What are friends for? The pink-skinned girl asked with a smirk before they all set off again. Think you can handle the trampolines? It's alright to say no if you need to. I think I'll wait on the side. He said as they approached and the girls nodded in understanding. Hope you can enjoy the next thing we go on then. Ribbit. Asui croaked happily, once more making Midoriya feel odd inside, but he nodded with a smile. He felt dopey whenever she addressed him for some reason. I'll stay with you while the others go on then. Jiru suddenly spoke up, walking up to him as the others took their place at the back of the line, Mina and Uraraka reluctantly letting go of him. I'm not too great with trampolines. Fair enough. Uraraka pouted, shaking with excited energy as she got closer to the trampolines in the line. We'll see you soon. See you soon. Both Jiru and Izuku called out together as the girls moved along in the line before they just turned and stared into the park. They felt a sudden pressure on his wrist and turned to see Jiru awkwardly holding it in an attempt to make up for Mina and Uraraka being gone. I'm not great with boys and hugging and that. She explained quietly, looking away. Sorry. That's fine, it's nice to have someone at all. Izuku waved away the issue before smiling brightly. And thanks for staying with me at all. You didn't have to. But I wanted to. Jiru said with a smile of her own before clearing her throat. Why do you keep acting all weird when Asui talks to you? I don't know. He admitted, scratching his head in confusion. I feel funny when she talks to me. Like you're going to be sick? Jiru asked with a frown and he quickly shook his head. No, I feel really good actually. Just weird. Like there are butterflies trying to escape from inside me, I guess. He did his best to put the feelings into words and the purple-haired giggled at the mental image. Maybe you should ask your mom or the Aoi Raozus. They might know. She said and he nodded. Maybe he would. I've been meaning to ask by the way, why were you at the park when we first met? Huh? What do you mean? He asked confusedly, tilting his head to the side. You were there alone, right? I doubt you would have gone there with those bullies. She said, and the boy sighed sadly. No, it's close to my house, so I just like to spend time there sometimes. Kakin also lives kinda nearby though, so he also goes there and we just kinda met that time. He explained, causing Jiro to frown. Then, suddenly her eyes went wide. Wait, you live close to the park? She asked, and he nodded. A smile then broke out on her face, and she leaned a little more into him in her sudden excitement. Then we live close to each other. Really? Midoriya asked, surprised, and she nodded enthusiastically. Like we're right near that beach, Dagaba. We should totally meet up sometime. She said happily, and a dopey smile did make its way onto Izuku's face this time. Like even just hanging out at the park for a bit could be fun. I'd like that. He admitted, and she made sure to get his number off him this time, so they could plan such a meetup. Soon enough following that, the girls finally got off, and Uraraka and Mina had quickly taken back up their posts of holding onto the boy, but anyone who was paying attention would have noticed Jiro remaining just that little bit closer to him through it all. In fact, from the moment they all set off from the trampolines until the moment they all finally had to leave, there wasn't a single instance where at least one of the girls wasn't hugging or holding his hand. Izuku smiled as he walked into the park alone, the sun shining bright in the sky, as he spotted a head of purple hair. Jiro? Huh? Oh. Hey Midoriya. She greeted with a small smile, waving to him as he hurried over to her. Are you doing okay? Huh? My mom made a really nice breakfast for us, and I'm really excited to see you. He blurted out without a care, making the purple-haired girl blush a tiny bit as she smirked. I'm excited to see you too. What do you want to do? She asked, curious what he would pick. The actual child's park was a bit small. There was a sandpit, some climbing bars, a swing, and a slide. Aside from that, they had a big open field to themselves. Izuku was able to wander freely here, as Inko wasn't too far at all, ready to come running at a moment's notice, and Jiro, well, her parents perhaps had gotten a little too used to letting their little girl roam free. I really like the slide. It's so fun with the wind. He giggled before a contemplative look came onto his tiny face, and he hummed, smiling at her. What about you? I bet you'd look really pretty with the wind in your hair. Deer was caught off guard by that, but a small smile came onto her face. She wasn't used to being called pretty, but she didn't dislike it and quickly stammered out a reply. Thanks, you too. It took a moment for her exact wording to sink in, and she bit her tongue. No, isn't it insulting to call a boy pretty? I mean, I know it's a compliment to me, but really, you think I'd be pretty? He asked, and his voice was surprisingly earnest, as if he was hopeful for her to confirm her statement. Not wanting to disappoint him, that was exactly what she did with a nod, and he smiled an unfairly bright smile. Yay. I'd like to be pretty. It's nice knowing someone thinks good things like that about me. Jiro frowned for a moment, put off by the phrasing of that before grabbing his hand. Neither failed to notice she'd taken a more genuine grip on it than her simply tugging of his wrist at the amusement park. Well, come on then. Let's go on the swings first, so we can see each other with the wind. She laughed, pulling him along, and he grinned as they both came up to the two swings. Jiro was a little smaller than Izuku, so he helped her up with a small blush before running around and giving her a push. It gave her a very small boost, slow and barely noticeable, but after a few Izuku ran to the other swing and jumped up on his own, barely able to push off the ground. Soon enough though, they both began to pick up speed with shared excited giggles. Izuku stole a glance to his side and was rather stunned by exactly how angelic the purple-haired girl looked as her hair whipped around and with that perfect content smile on her face. She noticed his staring after a moment and flashed him a somewhat embarrassed grin. What? Something the matter? No, I was right. He said, smiling brightly, and she let out a noise like a squeak before responding. So was I. She giggled before grinning more cockily. Hey Midoriya, watch this. Confused, he watched her soar higher and higher into the sky, his anxiety growing with the height she got. Then, his heart leapt to his throat and his eyes went wide as she suddenly launched off her seat and forward through the air. Ah, Jiro. He shouted in concern, both hands instinctively coming up off his swings and reaching out for her. Then his entire body, for the briefest of moments, felt different. Like his very core was trying to reach out, but then she stuck the landing, and though relieved the feeling faded and left him off balance as he fell forward and ended crashing into the ground. He pushed up with a small and pained expression as his shirt got its sleeve caught on a part of the ground and began to tear. Midoriya, look out. His friend tried to warn him, but it was too late as he pushed up while the swing was still going with plenty of momentum. THWACK. He let out a pained cry, being thrown to the ground once more. Kyoka bolted over, grabbing the swing quickly and doing her best to make it a non-issue before hurrying to his side with worried eyes. Her heart hurt when she saw the tears beginning to form in his emerald orbs. Ow 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 ow, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have scared you. This is my fault. The girl hastily began apologizing, and even through his pain, he tried to fix her with a reassuring look that was somewhat brought down by the large tears beginning to flow down her face. I gotta make up for this, it's fine. He hiccuped, not exactly doing a great job of hiding his pain as he grabbed the back of his head and his eyes shut tight. It was an accident. Don't feel bad, I'm sorry for. He suddenly stopped, eyes opening and going wide as his face heated up a little, feeling a pair of lips press briefly against the back of his head where he had been hit. Jiru. Sorry. She suddenly apologized, worried she did something wrong as she blushed herself and looked away. My mama always kisses my bruises better, so I thought it would help. I would have got a Shido or your rocket to do it, but they aren't here and it's so weird and I was the reason you got hurt and thank you. He said quietly, gently holding her wrist but not doing more. It helps. I'm glad. She managed a small smile after he fixed her with one of his own, doing her best to calm down. Her eyes wandered as she tried to think of what to do now, and her smile quickly shifted to a frown as her eyes widened upon seeing his now exposed arm. Why do you have burns? She recognized a type of injury by sheer happenstance, having seen her own mother suffer from burns a few times when she got overly confident in her cooking skills. Huh? Ah. He didn't give a straight answer, looking away, as if scared. Pakin? She asked, barely remembering the blonde's name from their very first meeting. He gave a stiff and reluctant nod and she sighed, very nervously wrapping her arms around her neck and causing him to let out a surprised squeak. Dear, I thought you didn't like hugs with boys. I want to change that. She said simply, admittedly feeling weird, but she didn't let go. He needed the support and without Mina or Chako, she had to do what she could. That was what a hero's job was, right? A thought occurred to her and she decided to ask a question she had been wanting to ask the other girls for a while. Midoriya? Yeah? He asked as she finally pulled away and he finally began to look like he was starting to feel better, something Jiru was happy to see. Could you call me Kyoka? She asked nervously and tilted his head in surprised confusion. But mom says calling people by their first name is rude. Izuku said with a frown and she began to fidget as she looked away. Only if they don't let you. I want to change my first name with the other girls. I think I should see if it works with you first though, please. Just say it so I can see if I'm okay with it. She asked and then nodded after a moment. He couldn't exactly refuse such a sincere request. Oh, okay, Kyoka. He said, and silence was all that was between them for a moment before a large smile worked its way onto the purple-haired girl's face. Thank you. She said with her voice the most genuine it had been so far. She'd worried it would feel weird for her to hear Izuku call her it and have to wait ages before she could feel comfortable with it. But, as her name left his lips, something about it just made the world feel right for a moment. But. Then you have to be allowed to call me Izuku, otherwise it isn't fair. He said very seriously, wanting to do his best to make up for the perceived rudeness, even if she was encouraging it. Oh, okay, then, Izuku. She said, still smiling, and he smiled back. She looked up and grinned for a moment, looking around. Want to go on the slide now? I'll let you go first. Yes, please. He said, scrambling up almost like he'd forgotten about his earlier pain and helping her up as well, seeming to refuse not having her close to his side as they moved for the slide. They continued to play together for hours until the sun was finally beginning to get close to setting and they knew they'd have to make their way to their home soon. Kyoka, determined to make the most of their time however, had pulled him away from the kids' area into the open field, taking him under a nearby tree with a huge smile on her face. It was slow, but she was starting to feel more okay with grabbing his hand at least, even if hugging still seemed a far way off thanks to their moments from earlier. So what are we doing now? Izuku asked in confusion, and she giggled, reaching into her pocket and pulling out a small device similar to a phone. Oh wow. Is that an MP3? I thought those were super hard to get. My mom and dad got it for me last year for my birthday. Jiru explained with a smile, patting the grass beside her. I want to know what kind of music you like, Izuku. But how will we? As if already predicting his question, she took out a headphone splitter and plugged it into the device before plugging in her own ear jack to one end and handing her headphones to the person who gracefully took them. Thank you. He said, sitting beside her with their backs against the tree for support. She held the device up so they both could see the screen. Izuku let out a small gasp as he saw some of the titles. She certainly wasn't expecting the excited question that came from him. You like all these songs as well? He asked, grinning wide. He recognized most of them from the ones his mother had saved on her phone to let him listen to or from videos online. Do you know them? Jiru asked, her own eyes glistening with excitement at the prospect. He nodded happily and she shoved the audio device towards him. Oh, show me your favorite. Okay. He nodded, scrolling through them. A few he didn't recognize, and it was possible a few he did, but didn't know the spelling of, and bypassed them, but eventually he came across a song he happily began to let play out into both their ears. An old English song, but a classic that they both had heard many times before. Lately I've been losing sleep, dreaming about the things that we could be. Content smiles formed on both their faces as the song played from there, both humming along to the tune with closed eyes, and happy faces right up until its eventual conclusion, leading into another song. In fact, they ended up humming a majority of the songs together, and even the few Izuku didn't know Kyoka seemed to be able to make up for it. With her joy for the music practically being contagious, he'd quickly found himself enjoying a lot of the music, even if not all of it was to his personal taste. All in all, as they hummed together and unconsciously shifted closer to one another, partially to make the headphones less taut and partially just out of a desire to do so, they continued to hum and sometimes even sing. Sadly though, all good things must come to an end, and this was no exception, as the purple-haired girl needed to start making her way home soon enough before the sky turned dark. I had a lot of fun today, Izuku. Me too, Kyoka. You'll be okay going home, right? He asked with concern, and she giggled, grabbing his hand and squeezing it to his surprise. I'll be fine. Oh, before I forget, did you find out what your whole thing with Asui was? Kyoka wondered, and Izuku frowned with a shake of the head. Mom just kind of freaked out before refusing to tell me, saying I had to figure it out on my own. That's weird. Oh well. She began to walk off and hummed with quiet worry. Can we do this again sometime? He asked, and she looked back with a massive grin. This was too much fun not to do again. And we can probably get together sooner than we could with the other girls anyways, so not like it's going to be long if you don't want it to be. She laughed, and he smiled, but his eyes betrayed his illogical but ever-present fear that they might just forget them. While Kyoka didn't know that was what he was thinking, she still noticed his face and sighed before running over to him while pulling out her phone. Well, just one more hug won't hurt, right, Kyoka? He asked, confused, as suddenly an arm wrapped around his neck and she pulled out her phone, pointing the camera at them. Both their faces were nervous and red, but smiling as the phone clicked and the picture was taken. He laughed and she began to move away. Text you soon, Izuku. You too, Kyoka. With that, they finally went their separate ways with massive grins on their faces. Jiru. Guys, I'm worried about Izuku. He has burns. Uraraka. What, that's horrible. Aoirozu. Oh dear. That is not good. Hagakure. We should do something for him, it's not good. Asuwa. But what? You? Momo. Do you have any ideas? Momo. Well, 1. We need to train to be pro heroes in the future, but mother says we should just play games for now in place of training. Midoriya likes heroes. Maybe we should just play games together while training, and that might help him when we cannot be there. Uraraka. That's OSMRT. Hagakure. Yeah. Momo. Thank you. If one of you contacts him, can I see if there is any time I will be free in future? Mina smiled as she looked at her phone, stars twinkling in the sky outside, as bright as her smile at the prospects of seeing all her friends together and getting another chance to hang out with Midoriya. She promised, as she snuggled up in her bed, to do everything in her power to help save him from whatever his problem was. Because that's what a hero would do. Thanks for watching my video, leave a like if you enjoyed my video, and also do consider subscribing to my channel for more awesome content. See you next time, till then sayonara.